My name is Sarah Peterson. I am on the VC EDU team, and our two amazing panelists. We have Gary joining in from Korea and Bob from Canada. Both of them are such established producers, directors, and filmmakers, and I'm just so excited to hear their thoughts. We'll just start off by, Bob, Gary, whoever wants to go first. Why don't you explain? I know that it's hard to kind of define it, but explain what a co-production is in certain terms, and maybe like give some background as to like your history of how you learned about it, and maybe like a successful co-production that you've had in recent times, just kind of like entry level stuff.
My first co-production, I think it was around 2008 or 9 with a British company. At the time, I had no idea, I just, at the time, I finished the 10 years of directing at the TV and I became freelancer. And I had a very vague idea. Actually, I had no idea because I just believed in co-production. Oh, okay, we co-produce, that's it. But had no idea what kind of responsibility and expectation involved. I just thought working together. But after that, I went through a various form of co-production, and something went very well because the condition that we agreed was very clear. But sometimes, many times, we just start with a vague agreement to work together. And as the time goes and the production proceeds, you see some problems comes up. So some project dropped. So something still going on. So it is a very, very vague and confusing concept, I think.
Fair enough,
but mostly nowadays, they talk about the money, the financial side, as when you hold someone as a co-producer, you have the expectancy to bring some money for you. I think that's where we start. It's a kind of general idea, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. That's often how people will come asking me about CoPro. I'll back up just a second to introduce myself as a producer from Montreal, Canada. My company, I Steal Film, does a lot of international feature documentary production. It's kind of the one only thing we do. And we end up collaborating a lot internationally, and that takes the form of what's called what's often called co-production. And that term, I thought it would be good to break down just a little bit, is used in a number of different contexts. And so, Gary, you're completely correct in saying it's kind of vague. It's vague in the sense of it's invoked in different situations. It's invoked by broadcasters when they pre-buy a film to say that we're going to be really involved in this film. It's invoked by people going into collaboration with each other, and it's specifically used in the context everywhere, or not everywhere, but many countries outside of the United States, to indicate an international treaty co-production using a system of treaties that sort of connects public financing from different countries around the world. That entire system, as I mentioned to Sarah a while back, is sort of entirely predicated on excluding Americans. So, and maybe why it has not come across a lot of American filmmakers. It's a system built to sort of counter American cultural dominance in the world. And so that ends up being, when you're at a European film festival or whatever situation like that, it ends up being kind of one of a term that's thrown around to mean something pretty specific. But I have found, like you, Gary, it's like I've found that any form of meaningful collaboration on the film can be basically considered a co-pro. There's two producers bringing different things, financial, creative, logistical, rights, key subjects, whatever, into a project and working together to make that happen. To me, that's the broadest definition that I could think of.
Basically, co-production is something that means when you are in co-production, that means that you are jointly producing a film, whatever you have in your mind. And the co-production partner, the co-producer, will be someone who can provide a significant amount of resources. But what kind of resources?
You'd like to think.
Yeah. Well, in first of all, in Asia nowadays, we are witnessing the booming of the documentary production, not just in Korea, in Southeastern Asia, and the different parts of Asia. And no country has there's enough money for you to make to complete the film for yourself. So we all actively looking for co-production partners, and many filmmakers from different parts of Asia come to Korea to pitch and to have meetings. But firstly, they expect just money, because there's some, let's say, government money or public funded money for Asian filmmakers, but often, that requires agent, so-called Korean producer, so that, for that, just like basically, even though in that case we call it a co-producer, but it acts more like a fiscal sponsor. So you get the money to your account, to my account, and I took some fees and send all the money back to the production company, and I don't own the any copyright, or I don't share the revenue. Just that's it. That is basically what they want, what they expect actually. But the thing is that it is not just about the money.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what you're saying is, like, particularly that is what generally what a co-production would look like in Korea, correct? Like that is, it's much more like of a mercenary sort of transaction versus like other experiences in different countries where it can be much more like less about the money, more so about, like, I don't know, maybe learning about or like collaborating in certain sort of like dealing with international sort of rules or whatever. And figuring out what that experience is. So on that note, Bob, maybe do you want to talk about a co-production, like in your past history, like a little bit of like a story of something, like, I don't know, maybe a particular standout of a film that you worked on and co-produced that was successful, or like I don't know, honorable.
Yeah, sure. I'll get specific in 1 second, I promise. But just off of what Gary's saying, it's like that his example is to me, I just learned about this last night when Gary and I were talking about a project that we're trying to co-produce right now, and he was talking about a form of co-production. I was like, basically you're talking about fiscal sponsorship. You're talking about like what IDA or whatever Women Make Movies or someone like that would do to like enable charitable donations to a film, essentially. And that's often the way that we've been over the years approached to do co-pros. Is people have heard that there's money in Canada, for example, and just like they've heard that there's money there are certain countries of the world, right, where there's money to make documentaries: Denmark, Germany, Korea, right? And they're like, people are like, okay, well, how about we just get some of that, but meanwhile there's somebody there who thinks that they actually can make movies, and that maybe that somebody is myself or Gary, and they're like, well, we have expertise. The Danish people have their editors, and the Chinese have their incredible cinematographers. I'm just start wildly overgeneralizing. I apologize, but there's certain attributes to certain countries within the international sphere of documentary production where you start to think about what could a collaboration with that country mean other than financial, and that is where an actual collaboration can start to come into effect. And in many cases, that's where, from that place, that's where the financing comes through. So let me think about an example and try not to get too weird and ancient about it. Because I am thinking about an old fun example of a film that Gary made many years ago called Planet of Snail that we had talked about. I did not co-produce in the slightest, but we've talked about way back. Remember that?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
pretty
We got
successful film.
Yeah. Now it reminds me that we got some fund from NHK Japan. They
Mhm,
literally invested just cash.
mhm,
It was about 30,000 US dollars at the time, and
mhm,
they wanted a co-producer title in
mhm.
co-production with NHK, and
Exactly.
also for that money in return as NHK's broadcaster, they wanted terrestrial TV right in Japan.
Mhm,
And
That's all they got.
this was
mhm.
a short or a feature, Gary? Explain just a little bit of context of the project. This was a documentary that you
Oh,
created?
yes, actually, sorry. The Planet of Snail was completed in 2011, and we won many international awards, including the Best Feature Documentary Award at the ITFA. It was at the time the first Asian documentary that won the Best Feature Documentary at the ITFA in the 24 years history at the time,
Great.
and followed by many awards internationally.
Mm.
So we start with just 3 pages of papers, and it took 3 years to finish. It's a story about a man who's deaf and blind, and he's also his partner who is a dwarf because she dropped from a tree when she was young, and their love story relationship also, there are a unique way to communicate with the world, when you see without seeing or hearing. That's the story. But
Mm.
back to co-production. So at Japan, the NHK put the money for terrestrial right in Japan, but that was a very, very significant help for us to complete film.
Right.
They joined us after they watched the rough cut, and they decide to join.
Mhm,
But before then, we had a Finnish co-producer, called Jan, and he approached YLE and the Finnish Film Council. They have a fund, co-production fund. So that means Finnish co-producer takes some fees.
Mhm.
Like I think he took about 15,000. Yeah, a little bit less than 15,000 US dollars, but the money we got was almost 50,000 from US dollars, and the condition was that we were supposed to spend some of the money in the film. So we could technically we could have brought some significant portion of the money to Korea,
Right.
but we decided to spend all the money in Finland because we found out that the sound designer and the sound work is really, really good and strong in Finland,
Yeah.
and it turned out very, very well, and it was a really, really money well spent. That's why it's when you think about just the amount of money, it could be practical, but you have to. I always try to think about the quality, what kind of quality or potentials to elevate the quality of your film with the co-production. That is kind of one of
Right.
my concern now whenever I think about the co-production.
Right. Absolutely. It's
That's
great to think in those broad strokes of like what countries in particular are very specialized in certain crafts or are known for
Mm.
like some very like beautifully cinematic aspects of whatever. So like your thing that sound design in particular in Finland, or like the cinematography and China. That's great to point out. And I think it's great to highlight that, like, again, co-production, a lot of people, they hear about it and they think it's much to do about just like a monetary situation, just an exchange and how to fund it, but it really, the layers, they're just so much deeper, right?
One of the things, Sarah, what is to consider is obviously where a film is being shot often ends up being kind of, or if there's a subject from a particular area, but there's so many factors to consider. I'll throw in my specific example because it might kind of play a bit off of Gary's here. Is our most recent released film, Midwives, is premiering on POV, and I'm going to say November 21st. I should have that date, right? And that the reason that's happening is that's a POV co-production, similarly to Gary's NHK co-production. That's what I was saying about a broadcaster might indicate that the way they come into a film, and it's essentially a pre-buy on a film, is has a certain creative implication, and that they're part of the process to a point that they're saying we're producers on this also, and it's a legitimate thing to say. It's not quite the same as in that case. For Midwives, it's actually a three-way co-production: Canada, Myanmar, Germany. The filmmaker is from Myanmar. Her name is Snow, and she shot the film herself / with another Myanmar-based DOP over the course of 5 or 6 years. My partner, who's Burmese Canadian, started dialoguing with her maybe, let's say, like 4 years ago, and then we ended up getting involved 3 years ago, formalized something with another German partner. We each brought money into the project, and we each brought a specific set of things that we would be doing on the project. And certainly in the case of a filmmaker from a part of the world like Myanmar, there weren't a ton of resources or capacities. So it made sense for her to partner up, but it also made sense for us to acknowledge the work that she had done and have her retain a significant proportion of ownership over the film. And so the copyright split on the film reflects that. Because the country was Myanmar, there's no treaty system for the rest of us in the world I was mentioning before, the treaty model. So there was no public financing available for the most part. So the PBS POV co-production, pre-buy co-production, kind of anchored the financing, mixed that in with some private equity, and then Germany was able to access some kind of soft money, state money. It's like incentive style money that has to be spent there, and in fact, more than the amount that's brought in has to be spent there. And this is something that you'll often find, is that if you're working with especially European countries, that they might have what's called like a spend incentive, and that might be 130% spend incentive. It might be a 300% spend incentive, meaning if they bring in $100,000, you have to spend 130 in that territory.
Sure.
So there's some, sorry, Sarah, to ramble on.
Oh, no.
That's the setup on that film. And it's like we were able to bring the three partners together to bring the resources necessary to get it completed, basically. Without that, I don't think it was happening.
Yeah, and I think you guys are touching upon things where, again, like you said, like it's so hard to generalize what co-production is, because it's so specific depending on who you're working with, country of origin of these people. Like the word treaty is such a perfect thing to say, because it kind of like invokes this message of like this kind of global trade, and like this, like, it's not really necessarily regulated in one general way. There are so many different stipulations that can go into a co-production. So again, for people that are attending, I hope that you guys are digesting some of these stories and understanding that, like, these are real life experiences, and kind of like to understand co-production is just almost to like hear more and more stories about it, and to like ask questions. So on that note, And again, hopefully, like, we can speak generally about it. I don't know how many people on the chat, if people want to chime in on the chat and let me know if you have actually participated in a co-production, or if this is like your first time hearing about it, that would be great to know. But I'm curious what both of your thoughts are. Say you are, you say that like there kind of like is this incentive almost to like keep American filmmakers out in a way. But say you're interested in this subject and you are a filmmaker and you've never gone this route, like what would be your advice to be like, okay, how do I even sort of broach the subject? Is it like research? Is it just like throwing myself into events like this and talking to people and trying to get to know people? I mean, even by way of just you and Gary being introduced through this, you guys are already kind of talking about, okay, like we should co-produce together on something. But I don't know, like as like an entry level question for someone who's a filmmaker who's never done this before, where would you like kind of point them to in a first initial direction to learn more about like what countries potentially they could work with, or like what treaty would be a good package for them essentially?
Oh boy, we got a long quote. I'm going to take a second to read this in a minute from Vanessa.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like I know somehow. Anyway.
Yeah, well, usually, I'm sorry.
Vanessa's a
I
pretty
would
established
recommend
member.
as independent filmmakers, I would recommend to try the pitching forum around the world in anywhere you can have access, because co-production with the broadcasters is tough, but it's simple because they have a long agreement and you cannot get out of it. So all the conditions and the there. So I think it's more important for what happens in between the co-production between independent filmmakers, producers. So to start with, I think it's a pitching forum is a very good stage, because first of all, your project has to be good enough to appeal to a bigger audience or decision makers. But I'm sorry, it's a cold reality. We can do lots of research online, but we have to be somewhere in presence and show the potentials of the project. And by attending, not just to get the money, by attending various kind of pitching forums, documentary forums, you have to find your network and find someone who speaks same language, who has shared the similar ideas about the world or about the subject. I think that has to be a good start.
I agree with Gary, and we were just talking about this at another event, of one of the few in-person events that we've been doing, finally come back to. And I think especially in the context of the United States, without a true national film program or anything that kind of centralizes the community in that way, the presence of regional festivals and the markets around those festivals is the community in the States. And I'm sure that the folks on this call are largely part of that and recognizing that and probably building that out. But like points north and Camden and True Falls and these places, San Francisco, and all I could go on, and Big Sky. There's nodes around the country that are I talk about them because the in-person element is very significant. The relationship that goes into co-pro is huge, and for some people hyperbolize it towards marriage and stuff like that. I'm not going to go that far, but it's a significant thing. So, Sarah, you mentioned Gary and I meeting. Gary and I have known each other for 10, 15 years. So the fact that we're doing it, it's comfortable for us to do a film together. We know each other really, really well. It's weird to give half your movie to a stranger and be like, hey, good luck raising the money. Let's hope this works out. It's a major leap of faith. So at least meeting in person and getting a little bit of body language sense is significant. I know that represents a cost up front, and certainly Gary knows that Asian filmmakers coming to these markets in Europe and stuff, it's like sometimes it's costing you more to get to the market than it would take to just make the movie. And so there's that, but certainly that's a major step. The other one would be the genre, you know, within the wide world of documentary, there's a certain amount of, I think, logically research to finding like-minded companies that do stylistically the same type of films. And that I'm not surprised by how few people actually do that. It's weird, like in pitching documentaries, we sometimes joke about this, like nobody uses comps in you know, when people pitch fiction, they always use comps, comparables. And no one uses comps in docs because people don't watch each other's films. So
Right,
it's
right.
like you can't even say comps. But like check out, you know, if people are doing the type of film that you're doing, figuring that out, which then also has implications to the researching the release of your film and festival strategy and all that stuff. So even if you're not going to co-produce with them, you find an essential stylistic comp that you can use then for your own fundraising and or distribution strategy.
I want to turn into we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, yeah.
We could start with Vanessa's.
I think it can be a broad question, which is about expectations around maintaining rights. So I have a feature doc that is fully shot and has been basically self-funded to this point. And we're trying to raise equity financing by partnering with a production company. And it was all good. We were all groovy. Everyone was artist friendly until we got the terms of the deal, which took all control of creative, business, and financial control of the project. And so this was like totally shocking to me. And then I've talked to a few other producers that were sort of like, well, this is just, you know, this is just the industry. And I'm just wondering what you could, if you can speak broadly about what expectations should be as far as maintaining rights and ownership through a production deal, like what's reasonable, at what point you cede that control and when you're getting screwed.
I mean, that's where we're going into more our wheelhouse probably of the folks on the call in terms of how co-productions manifest themselves in the States is often with different production entities in the same territory. And it ends up being like a rights split or a ceding of rights. I mean, your friends are kind of right in that that's sort of how the industry works. I'd also like to think that that's not how the industry should be modeled or how it should move forward. Easy for me to say. I think that taking over full business controls, unless is this entity essentially taking over the film and taking full responsibility for the financing and delivery of the movie? So they would fund 100% of the film?
No, they're not putting any money in. It's like a shopping agreement, essentially, that's saying like,
So
you know, yeah, it just seems like a bad deal.
absolutely insane. So, no, I think that's not right. That's not right. I mean, there's a few, so there's like a dozen companies, folks on the call are probably familiar, that are like the providers for the major streamers in Hollywood. Okay, and so, you know, the Jigsaws and whatevers of the world. These are companies that may be able to, in good faith, do something like that, and you could have a pretty reasonable expectation that the film is happening. Almost anyone else in the world cannot ask that. I don't know what the deals are with those companies because we're our own thing. I don't deal with them. But generally speaking, giving all your rights, all your power, and all of your control over the film that you've self-financed and developed is, I would consider, abusive and not appropriate. And I think that, especially if there's no money involved, that seems like a no-brainer to me. So unless it's Oprah saying this and the money's going to come next week, no, to be blunt. But there is a general point to be taken here, which is that like there's a leap of faith, and it's like, how much are you going to give? You got to give something, right? Someone's doing something for you, and you're doing, you know, you're collaborating. So you got to give them some possibility of coming back at them. It may be 30% of the copyright, and it may be 60%, and maybe they have final cut because they're the experienced production company. They've delivered films before, and you haven't delivered a feature. You know, for Midwives, we had delivered 6 films to POV. We won them Emmys. We're like a somebody with them. So when a first-time filmmaker from Myanmar is pitching them a film, and we say, hey, this is an iSteel film, that gives something.
Some leverage.
But am I saying, is my deal with Snow I'll take it from here, you have no more control? Absolutely not. I don't think that's appropriate. And certainly, and part of that is that she shot and self-financed the film for a couple of years before she even came into us, and that material wouldn't have existed to pitch out. So a little bit of mutual respect in that situation, I think, would be more appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's the spirit in it, isn't it? We all want to make a film about the justice, equality, something good, or raise voice against something bad. So that
Yeah.
the way we produce has to be the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and also the important thing is that the creative control you just mentioned, it is really, really important. Well, let's say if someone give me 90% of funding, then if you think about just money, you can just get it. But it's your film, your story, your creativity. So exactly, last year, what happened with one of my projects in the Philippines. I'm a main producer of the project, and another producer and the director, Filipinos, fully produced in actual production, is happening in Philippines. And the biggest TV broadcaster came to us. They liked the story, and they said they want to invest 60% of the total budget. It was about $350.
Okay.
But I rejected
Oh,
because
they want too much control.
Yes, then you will not have a control legally. First of all, they will have say, and you are just hired by them. So, well, in the end, we said, so I suggested back like a 40% will be greatly appreciated. But it didn't happen because the Duterte, they shut down the broadcaster. So,
Jesus Christ.
So we start from scratch. So still, while keeping rolling the camera, we were still, looking for a small fund in the Philippines. Now getting some help from UN human rights commissioners to get some more funds. So it's just keep going on. But the thing is that creative control. It's your film, your story. So within the vicinity that you can keep your own creative control, I think you have to make a decision.
I'm just curious on that note. Do you guys? Sorry to interrupt, Bob. Maybe you'll answer this, but do you guys encounter that a lot? Like, do you encounter when depending on, I don't know, who you're working with, essentially, like, does that seem to be like a pretty common theme, or do you feel like that's kind of like more like I don't know, like central to
it's a question that needs to be addressed. And so Gary mentioned something early on that we've glossed over a little bit here. I think that's important, is that even treaty, co-pro, no treaty, whatever, joint venture, I would say in almost all cases, there should be a written agreement relatively early in the process, or at a point that makes sense, where the terms of the collaboration are detailed. And one of the key terms of that agreement is who has final creative control. So an easy way to determine that would be who's the majority producer or who's the director. You might say the director has final cut. And in certain territories like France, for example, they're effectively, by law, the director has final cut. There are other scenarios in the American context where the distributor will, generally speaking, have final cut. The streamers in their agreements will, if they're doing an original, will generally take final cut. So it comes up a lot, and the question of what that, who has it, both legally and effectively, is significant. So it speaks to control, but it also speaks to expectation. I think in the case of Gary, was that the kidnapping film? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
That, it's like, I think partly what you're saying there is like, the concern is, what is this Philippine broadcaster, what kind of film are they actually trying to make here? Because if you have a fundamentally different conception of what's coming out the other end, you may have a massive issue in the edit, If one party thinks they're making basically a reality show and the other thinks that they're going to premiere at Vision du Réel, like you could have a clash that is completely unsolvable. So before I have never, knock on wood, had to invoke Final Cut when we've had it, and it's never really come to, you never want to have to go there, really. And the only way to avoid it is to make sure people understand that you're making the same film and what that film is going to be. And then when you pitch it together, that you pitch the same film so that the market partner also understands what the film is that they're buying. That I've screwed up a few times, but you try to make it clear. Well, films change along the way too, right? But you try to be as clear as possible, because the Final Cut, invoking Final Cut is kind of a disaster. Essentially, like and the streamers will say that too. I was talking with someone from one of them recently, and they were like, for them they say it, but actually it almost works the opposite way, especially with the celebrity films, that those people will have, they essentially have effective, just by bullying and whatever, they kind of have Final Cut regardless of what the streamer says. And it's like that, just managing the expectation and figuring out what the film should be is a process that everybody's doing along the way.
Right. So transparency, I think, is a big theme. That is something that's kind of essential when you go into this. I'm curious, because it sounds like you guys it sounds like having like very intelligent business instincts is like so crucial. And I mean, that's like a crucial part of like being any sort of filmmaker that wants to distribute, but like the experiences that you guys are talking about, like some of them sound kind of scary for people that are going into this, and it's like there's a lot of risk involved. I mean, do you guys consider yourselves to like have had an edge, like sort of like an edge over other filmmakers, in that like maybe you're more business oriented, or do you think it's just like the sheer amount of experience, or like where does like this this knowledge kind of come from? Like it's, we're kind of telling campfire stories now about like all of these different intricacies that could happen, but like how do we kind of like shape or like give people like a word of not caution, because I don't want to like make it sound like it's this big scary thing, but there is a lot of risk involved. And so like I don't know, are there any words of advice or any like particular qualities that you think are essential before you go into these endeavors?
Well, for me, it's always about a person.
Yeah.
Because money, well, sometimes, just like the co-production deal with the broadcasters or certain, let's say bigger production companies who can provide finance or help. But, before then, I think it's about as Bob said, leap of faith. You need that. You have to trust. You need someone you can trust, and who has different eyes, and who can help you with the creativity. First of all, without this, okay, often we start with someone. Okay, let's work together. And what if, let's say I have a producer in America, and what if she cannot get any money from America? Then what's going to happen to our relationship?
Right.
So maybe also you can start like like a honeymoon period. Let's try 2-3 months together. If something you never know, you just met someone who's very likable at the pitch forum, and we had a really nice time at the bar, talk about documentary making and the subject, and okay, let's go together. And then it takes time to find out actually what if we have something need for each other. So let's say 2-3 months. If it doesn't work, you have to also have courage and the respect to say I'm sorry. But once they started, it is really the great leap of faith. You have to trust. It's not about money, because I often felt that we briefly talk about I want Bob to join one of my production as a co-producer or eco-producer. The thing is that it's not about money, because I already know that he can bring something I don't have, new perspectives. And when we talk about, how to shoot, let's say how to deal with the business, also more importantly, it's all about the story structure and the editing, it's
Mm.
the quality of the film.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I
No,
think then, the chances will follow you.
Yeah.
and I'll jump on that, Sarah, just to say, I often say that, like, you try to find partners that are sort of in a similar place. It's kind of weird because if everyone's starting out, then who knows what they're doing. But a true, like, power mismatch or sort of experience mismatch can sometimes be a little bit weird in terms of, especially in terms of creative collaboration. It's sort of like having like a first-time director with like an editor that's been working for 50 years or something. There's something, sometimes it's like, it's just kind of weird in that respect. But I want to relate this to the question from Frederick here about like, do co-producers make their investments back? I want to sort of nuance that question by saying, Frederick, like, every co-producer is an investor, but not every investor is a co-producer, so it's not, there is a financial aspect to co-production in that normally there's two production companies or two producers who are both invested in the success of the film and could make money. Most don't. Try to make some money in fees during production and make the distribution kind of gravy. That's my philosophy on that, so that you're not mortgaging out and looking for a home run. But it's not it's not so much a question of making back the investment itself as it is making good on the promise of the project. That might sound vague, but like the responsibilities that you've taken on in jointly agreeing to make the film, has everybody fulfilled those responsibilities? Is the film done, closed, moving through, but there are some within the American context, especially, investors who would say they would take in association with credit. Let's say they're co-producing, but they're saying they're co-producing, they're going to take the in association with, they take a couple EP credits, but basically they're giving you like a couple $100,000, let's say, for those credits, and they want their money back. That's a different situation. I wouldn't call those true co-producers, because they're not really responsible for making the film. To me, a co-producer is in the trenches and is as invested as you are. The sound designer's gone AWOL, something's going wrong. You guys are the ones that are getting on the phone, figuring it out. Turns out you didn't get the licensed music, you got to recut the movie, whatever it is, they're in it as much as you are. And that's the in some ways, maybe an easier, I could have probably opened with that, but that's in some ways an easier way to define what the relationship feels like. Yeah, one or the other.
Ryan is asking for you to clarify your comment, Bob. Ryan, maybe you want to join in and like.
Yeah, I guess I like, as a mostly DP straddling narrative and documentary, I think I'm normally on what you described as your fees during production, of pay yourself, right? Like, make sure your budget has. But I wondered, as someone who knows 1,000 times more than I do about this kind of stuff, if there are other ways that you tend to protect yourself from the fact that a lot of films don't make their money, and I think that that's not exactly directly tied to co-production, but I know that co-production can be a huge part of that. So I thought maybe that might be something to follow up on.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's certainly, obviously, it's preoccupation, and when you're producing a number of projects at once, which becomes the sort of the way of making a living doing it. It's like, if you have a couple of films that you're basically making on spec, you've got a potential massive risk on your hands. To me, the fees thing is a big deal. And I think there's a big difference between, deferral against financing versus deferral against true deferral, meaning deferral against like distribution revenue. The reason I brought it up before and talked about something like the home run is that it has become trendy in recent years within the American context because of the stories of films like Boys State or whatever it is, they've made, you know, Summer of Soul and stuff like that, doing these like 8-figure deals that if you just make it good enough that you could make it back 100 times over. And it's just the percentages, the numbers don't work out. So I only say it in the context of like, if you're making a film to sell it to Netflix, it's just a bad strategy in my opinion. And I would rather stuff comes up during production. It does relate to co-production because stuff comes up during production where the opportunity to carve into some of that debt by selling off rights, and that may be through a co-pro deal, comes up, and your instinct, because you want to sell to Netflix or Disney or whatever, is I need to retain all world rights to do a world deal, to do an originals deal. To me, that is too risky to do, because you've basically you've taken away the chance to pay yourself now for this chance for a massive home run. You can still make revenue on a film with rights pre-sold. Midwives was pre-sold in the United States and Germany, and I forget, there was one other minor territory, and it still sells territory by territory. It's sold to BBC UK, it's sold to NHK, it's sold to Scandinavia. The end result is a distribution revenue that is not voice state, but is not nothing, and we got paid during production. So it relates to co-production in that when opportunities arise to co-produce that involve splitting out rights, it may be advisable to take those instead of saving yourself for the grandiose sale, which certainly in recent festival cycles, and I think who was saying this, Ellen was talking about consolidation in the marketplace. Certainly this is a massive thing that's happening within the US documentary market right now, is that it's become very risk averse and very centralized. And so being good enough is not good enough. It has to in most cases be famous enough, and it's not interesting. So that's all to say about that. Sorry, Gary, you feel the same way, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we don't just run for a lottery. There's so many people talk about the Netflix and the big OTTs, so-called off the top, the platforms. But they have a kind of a big financial control nowadays. But think about it, there are about 2,000 or 3,000 documentary produced a year around the world.
Right. Wow.
And many of them they're working independently, and the independent filmmakers co-producing, working together to make something. And there's still, we don't make a big money, but I think that's why, again, you need a good co-producer or good partner, because rather than have a much of a equity investment, there are small, the production grant, so-called the soft money. You have you secure some money to make enough to make a good trailer or teaser or so you secure some money, and they just keep rolling the camera, and also collaborating together to elevate the quality of the film. That is how I'm doing. So many different cases. I'm not thinking I have one co-production with Norway, and I just finished one with Finland. I have a project in Nepal, India, Philippines, and Korea as well, and also in China. So it's all happening at the same time, but all different.
That sounds exhausting.
On all different conditions. Yeah, it's the thing is that because sometimes you cannot. Well, I'm very clear. If I think, okay, I'm just taking a fee and just play as an agent, it's cool. But some project I can, the Norwegian project, it is about the North Korean defector matchmaker in Korea.
Oh.
So, okay, then the Norwegian director, he's very creative. It's great, but at the same time, I know that I have a deeper, a better insight into Korean culture and the relationship between North and the South. So I can really provide something significant quality-wise.
Sure.
So then I suggest, no, I want just something more than fee, because I know that I can really contribute something.
Sounds like you could be
some,
co-directing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yes, but it's also a fun of a producer to help the director to reach the next level, or really help to visualize, make his vision to realize.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely something said about meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And I think that that's kind of like a final note that, we're wrapping up now. It's 8:00. First of all, thank you guys so much for your participation. This was fantastic. Thanks for everybody who attended. Bob and Gary, you guys have such great insights. I think just in general, I love that our conversation had shifted from like numbers, finance, business, but like truly, like, I think you guys have given some really insightful commentary on how it's so much more than that. And it really is about trust and developing relationships that are so much more beyond a payout at the end of the day.
One more last minute question.
Of course, go ahead, Sebastian.
Sorry, me and my film partner, we filmed the documentary, using our own funds, but we already got half of it paid back by an investor. But we're still like trying to find somebody we can partner up with. Maybe the dream is, of course, being on a Netflix or other streaming services, but we're a needle in a haystack. Do you recommend us, because we already started editing it, do you recommend us just continuing with finishing the film and just see what's happening afterwards, or do you recommend trying to find a co-producer right now and possible pre-sale, or we're because we're first-time filmmakers and we're kind of like figuring this out as we go?
I think it doesn't hurt to share a cut of the film. Certainly. It's a bit late for meaningful co-production because most of your key creative roles have been filled at this point. So maybe you could do something where someone takes over like technical, like post-picture log, post-production. But realistically, I think you're trying to gauge interest. It may be a case of an MG from a distributor. If your rough cut is really solid, right, you can maybe share that, and maybe that's essentially your key collaborator. And instead of co-producing, they're kind of co-releasing and taking you through the marketplace and taking some of the sting out of the debt going into release. One thing I would say, and I know that this is the case worldwide, Gary, tell me if I'm crazy here, but if you've been working in isolation, just sharing the film with other people before you try to just get it out and it's done is huge. You do not want to have the premiere be the place where people are like, you're out of your mind. Like, this doesn't work at all. And it's really hard to figure that out without having just some feedback. So either way, share the cut with some sales agents. So I would start there. That would, with some reputable sales agents, just try to figure that part out. Pre-selling rights, I'm a fan. I don't buy into the all rights lottery.
Yeah, it happens actually a lot because Bob and I do a lot of mentoring. Sometimes I have to read about the 200 proposals a year to review and to select, and then in return I get lots of emails with rough cuts. So I'm really trying to review and share my insight. But the thing is that a few weeks ago, one very respected environmental documentary director, she's very good, well known. One of her films were invited to Berlinale, and now she comes with a new film. And I mentored her project a few times, and now she called me and said, "Oh, would you have time to have a look and discuss?" And I went to her office, and she said the film is 97% done. Said, "Okay, then what's the point?"
Yeah.
And
we spend so much time.
As
No, that's
Bob said, I always recommend the filmmakers, please do share your rough cuts with your friends and the colleagues and get the response. And you have to really think again that that this is really a film I imagine, because you know too much of it. So you need the fresh eyes to make it stronger and more, how to call it, more universal or reachable to a bigger audience.
Yeah.
None of the
Mhm.
films, none of the, let's say, ever since the new Oscar rules came out, none of those nominees are unknown in the community. Everyone knows those movies because they've been around forever, and a lot of them had their rights pre-sold and they got bought out. So it's like integrate. That what you're doing now, being part of this panel and more of that, Rough Cut Labs, whatever, being part of it before the film gets done. None of the big films to me come out of nowhere.
Mm.
All right.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
Sebastian, good
Yeah,
luck.
appreciate that. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks.
And Ryan, to you as well, and to everybody who asked, specifically Vanessa. I think she might have dropped off, but I hope that you guys got some pretty great insights. I know that Bob, you shared your email in the chat. If you
Hi,
guys
Gary,
have
too.
questions,
We get, I'm not saying that
Gary.
doesn't mean we're watching Rough Cuts tonight or anything, but
Yeah.
So,
Do not flood Gary and Bob with your rough cuts. But I appreciate everybody's attendance. And Gary and Bob, once again, thank you so much. I hope that everybody found this insightful. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great rest of your week.